Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a truly grim, dark Gothic fable. It's a psychological allegory about the complete collapse of order and the terrifying rise of primal vengeance. And to do this justice, I'm stepping directly into the source material for you. I'm adopting the persona of the story's tragic figure, the High Judge himself. So step right into my tribunal and let me explain the architecture of my own demise. To really understand how my grand society, the Gilded Hollow, fell to a state of pure retribution, we have to confront a terrifying truth. A truth I absolutely refuse to acknowledge about my own courtroom. As our ancient codex warned, he who mistakes the preservation of the weak for the elevation of the spirit has built his temple upon a floor that hungers. I honestly believed I was creating a sanctuary, but I was actually just building a buffet for something incredibly dark. The tarantula doesn't need an invitation. He literally only needs for the door to remain unexamined. So picture this. I sat at the absolute summit of what was essentially an architecture of appearances. My courtroom was this grand theater of columns fashioned from lacquered ambition, and my gavel was the ultimate symbol of accumulated law. But the order I presided over? It wasn't cruel and it wasn't kind. It was completely sterile. My laws multiplied, not to liberate the spirit of my citizens, but just to insulate the fearful from the shock of becoming something more. Every single edict I passed was like a bandage over a wound that had never been allowed to heal into strength. The weak were protected in the exact same way a museum protects its exhibits. Preserved from harm, sure, but also from air, from sunlight, and from any genuine psychological growth. I thought I was bringing order, but actually, I was just setting the stage for ruin. Okay, let's dive into this dynamic. Above the floorboards, that was my domain. I represented the superego, enforcing this completely sterile legalism. Philosophically speaking, I embodied passive nihilism, basically protecting against chaos by eliminating all conditions for growth. But below, right down below, lived my shadow, Von Nix. He represented the id, that subterranean hunger driven by active nihilism and a really dark thirst for revenge. Our whole psychological ecosystem was this fragile, incredibly dangerous tension between the polished, suffocating laws up above and the primal, active venom waiting patiently down below. Let me formally introduce you to the architect of my undoing, Von Nixt, otherwise known as the Tarantula. He had no throne, and honestly, he didn't need one. He is the archetypal id. Just imagine this creature, crouching patiently in the damp, dark spaces right beneath the polished stone where I sat, and where the condemned stood. He was born of pure envy and primal resentment, and he would just spin his web in the silent intervals between my verdicts, just waiting in the pauses between my gavel's hollow pronouncements. He was the chaotic truth hidden just beneath civilization. And here we get to my great confession, my cardinal sin. So the crucial point is that the first catastrophe of the Gilded Hollow wasn't actually the venom itself. It was my complicity of silence. There are folks who say I knew of the presence down below. And, well, they're right. I did. On certain quiet evenings where the last petitioner had left, I would press my ear to the floor and I could actually hear the slow, meticulous industry of his silk against the wood. I didn't act, because acting would have required acknowledging that the foundation of my authority wasn't stone at all. It was the very anxiety he consumed. A house that refuses to name the creature in its walls doesn't keep the creature out. It only ensures that when the walls finally speak, they'll speak entirely in the tarantula's voice. Let's actually break down the mechanics of his gray silk web. This wasn't some weapon of brute force. It was a patient philosophy made completely tactile, spun strand by strand. I could almost hear him whispering through the floorboards, plotting to connect everyone, not through love, but by ensuring absolutely no one stands taller than the rest. Step 1 was leveling distinction. Step 2 was stifling growth, basically trapping potential beneath an invisible ceiling. And Step 3 was weaponizing language. He realized that the space beneath the floorboards needed to be identical in its darkness to the space above, and he achieved that through this subtle, suffocating web that bound us all together. And this brilliantly illustrates how the genius of his gray silk lay in its invisibility. Every single soul remained flat and sterile as a tomb. Anyone who tried to climb the Nietzschean mountain path of self-overcoming, boom, immediately bound by this web. The suffocating safety of my laws up above perfectly complemented the tarantula's web down below. It trapped anyone trying to elevate their spirit, which rendered the entire society intellectually and spiritually flatlined. It completely prevented any true personal growth. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the Ide is an absolute master of disguise. Von Neeks didn't just come out and preach his doctrine as venom, he repackaged it. Call it justice, he'd hiss from the dark. Call it virtue. He became this twisted preacher of nothingness. He understood, with that terrifying patience that only the deeply resentful possess, that his venom didn't need to be called venom. Because think about it. When you dress up dark, primal envy in the shiny robes of righteous justice, people don't fight it. They welcome it. They literally champion the very venom that is paralyzing them. Which brings us to a crushing, tragic irony. A sterile order protects against chaos by eliminating the conditions for growth, right? But in doing so, it doesn't defeat the nihilistic impulse. It actually feeds it. The id denied a name does not dissolve. It just acquires patience. The longer I refused to descend beneath my own floorboards and confront that darkness, the more thoroughly Von Nix was able to furnish that space with his gray silk. My willful ignorance was literally his greatest nourishment. Then came the psychological breaking point, the void mirror. My fractured psyche was nearing its inevitable collapse. Imagine the floorboards suddenly becoming transparent, and I am forced to gaze downward directly into the foundation of my own mind. I looked at the tarantula, and he looked right back. "You are me," the darkness whispered. "I am the gavel, and you are the venom." I didn't see him as an invader anymore. I saw him as a perfect, horrifying reflection. And here is the revelation that broke my mind entirely. My endless passing of laws, my sterile ordering of society, my core desire to punish under the guise of justice, it was all born of the exact same dark impulse as his primal resentment. The polished gavel of the superego and the venomous fangs of the id were literally one and the same. We were completely symbiotic, just two different expressions of the exact same active nihilism. Wild, right? Let's see how this builds, because this realization triggered what we call the inferno of nihilism. The center could not hold. Every single symbol of institutional authority in the gilded hollow, the gavels, the lacquered columns, the precedent, it all completely dissolved. The illusion of my moral superiority shattered into a million pieces. The floorboards gave way entirely, and I plummeted right into his waiting jaws. Out of that catastrophic collapse, a horrific final form was born. The Red Judge. This was the inescapable, terrifying merger of my fractured, legalistic power and the tarantula's awakened, subterranean vengeance. The High Judge and Von Nitzt ceased to be separate entities. I was no longer the preserver of a sterile order, and he was no longer just a patient spinner in the dark. We fused. We fused into a terrifying new archetype that wore the robes of law but bled the venom of pure malice. The patient philosophy of the Gray's silk web ended that day. The Red Judge is a machine of pure retribution. The quiet spinning in the dark was entirely replaced by the active branding of the world. We no longer needed to masquerade as virtue or justice. It became about retribution solely for its own sake. Because when legal power and unbridled resentment merge like that, you don't get justice. You get an active, destructive force that seeks only to punish existence itself, just for the crime of being. And so, the Gilded Hollow fell, not to an invading army, but to the unacknowledged darkness in its very own foundation. Now, I want you to look at your own life, your own personal order. What whispers beneath your floorboards? What anxieties, resentments, or primal instincts are you flat out refusing to name? Because I promise you, the Ide denied a name acquires patience. And what are you going to call it when it finally speaks? Heed my warning, everyone. Examine your foundations before this explainer becomes your reality.